Hi everyone, I'm Sandie La Nae. Welcome to Psychic Creations History Series. You are about to embark on a blast to the past. We have a very interesting program for you today as we are featuring the historic accounts of Buffalo Bill Cody, who had a lengthy career and many recognitions such as, Army Scout, Pony Express rider, ranch hand, wagon train driver, bison hunter, fur trapper, gold prospector, and last but not least, a showman. Portraying Buffalo Bill Cody is Western performer Chuck Baldauskas. Thank you so much for joining Psychic Creation History Series today.
Well, Miss Nancy, it's my pleasure.
I'm Sandie.
Well, her too.
I love it. I love it.
I don't know why you're Miss Nancy. I must have known you at a different time.
I think you probably did, because that's a very nice name, Nancy. That is. All right. Now, if you would, Buffalo Bill, please tell our viewers about yourself and your place in history.
Well, as you mentioned, I'd been a number of things, and most of those things you mentioned were prior to me being 14 years old. With the exception of being an Army Scout and a buffalo hunter, I was also a stagecoach driver. Russell Majors and Waddell, they also owned the Overland Stage Company, or at least one of them did. And I got to meet, and he was the Western outlaw, Jack Slade, who ran one of the stage stations of that leg, about a 250-mile leg of the stagecoach. And I rode with the Pony Express, but people have to remember, I was 14 years old. I was only a fill-in. I wasn't even hired as a rider.
Oh, okay.
And they had somebody that got in a shootout and was unable to ride because of his demise. So I took on his ride, and from the 3 crossings of the Platte to Red Butte, which was over 75 miles, but when I got there, the other rider didn't show up. So I had to continue on until I met the guy coming from the west. Oh. And then I had to turn around, and in 24 hours, I rode 324 miles.
Oh, goodness sake, that was a very long ride.
I did not want to ride a horse for about 2 weeks after.
I can imagine so.
So, and other things that I was a justice of the peace. And I can proudly say no marriage that I put together was ever torn asunder.
Nice.
That's my big claim to fame for maybe all 3 marriages I performed.
Oh.
And I was elected to the Nebraska state legislature. I did not ask to be nominated. I did not run. I did not campaign, nor did I get sworn in.
Oh.
I never served as the state senator. But because I was elected state senator, I was entitled to the honorific of the Honorable Buffalo Bill.
Isn't that incredible?
So, yeah, and 2 governors appointed me colonel of the Nebraska State Militia, which was the highest rank. And the political reasons, you know, if they ever had to be nationalized or join into the American Army per se, the generals would outrank me and they could take command and there's no conflict. Mm-hmm. And so anyhow, I'm proud of all those accomplishments. Mm-hmm. And I earned my name hunting buffalo in 18 months. I had shot 4,800 buffalo. Nice. At $1.25 a piece. The money for that was paid by the Kansas and Pacific Railroad. I supplied meat for their workers and for the U.S. Army and the posts that were along the frontier. Mm-hmm. I was paid through the commissary, or the supply, mm-hmm. of the Army, and they were getting confused because there was another gentleman, Buffalo Billy Comstock, and Buffalo Bill, so there was some confusion. And so somebody thought this is a great way to make money, get North Platte, Nebraska on the map. They decided to have a buffalo hunt to determine who would have the rights to the name Buffalo Bill.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
We both agreed, and I outshot Billy in 2 days of competition, and I 69 to 48, I believe was the final number, 42 or 48.
Okay.
He's a loser, so I don't remember what he had.
Well, sure.
He won a pistol, nice nickel-plated Colt's pistol, new pistol, and I got $500, which promptly went to Mrs. Cody.
Oh.
I think she was ready to spend that before I was. She had designs on that money, I'll tell you.
Sure.
So this is what made my name, and then where I started to get national attention is that when I became a scout for the Army, when the Indians started to become pacified, using the government term at those days, and on reservations, well, there were less and less need for people of my nature, and what I did as a civilian or contract employee, there was nobody to chase over the prairies, but General Sheridan, who was the commander of the frontier at that time, he decided that he would keep me employed as long as possible, my $50 a month, thank you very much, by northern businessmen and whatever. I would take them out on the prairie for buffalo hunts, elk hunts,
okay.
and that sort of thing. So these people getting to know me and my exploits, some real,
Yeah, I get that.
mostly real,
Yeah.
but you know the tall tales of the frontier are still tall tales.
Yeah, sure.
But these gentlemen enjoyed my company and what I did, and I was invited back east, and people like Ned Buntline, who was actually Edmund Judson Carroll, who became Ned Buntline. That was his nom de plume. The most popular book written in those days were pirate stories.
Oh.
And those were the biggest sellers. But now what was starting to capitalize in the East were the adventures of the Western people on the frontier.
Sure.
People were hungry for that. It was something new, something dangerous, something exciting. It fit with the American psyche. And so anyhow, he wrote a story about me, of my real exploits and things that he thought I should have done. And the book sold famously. He could not believe it. All the books that he had written previously about pirates, etc., that one book outsold everything. So he decided he's going to write a play and take it to Buffalo Bill. Well, I wouldn't have anything to do with it.
Okay.
I'm not going to go on stage. I'm not an actor. I'm not a performer. Bye. I'm not doing it. So he kept coming at me. I'll make you famous. Well, Mr. Judson, no offense, but I am kind of famous. No, the whole world will know who you are. I don't care. I will make you rich, Mr. Cody. I will make you rich. Now he had my attention.
Well, sure.
Because I've always been a family man.
Okay.
I had a number of sisters. My mother, my father died early. He had been stabbed. He was a abolitionist, if you will. He was called abolition. He just didn't want slavery brought into Kansas. And this was just slightly prior to Bleeding Kansas, period. But it took him a couple of years or so, but he eventually died of his wounds. But I was very family oriented and wanting to take care of my sisters and my mother and such. Well, after the Pony Express folded, which only lasted about a year, I went home with Wild Bill Hickok, James Butler Hickok, and another friend, and we did things around the home. Hickok, when the war started, he went and joined up right away, went to see the elephant. Whereas my mother said, you're too young, you're 15 years old, when you're 18, and she was hoping everybody had talked in those days, the war was going to be over early. You're 18, then you can join if you want to. Well, just prior to my 18th birthday, my mother passed.
Oh,
But when I turned 18, I wasn't really thinking about joining, but I was on a spree for my birthday,
okay.
and the recruiters happened to be there. And enough said. Can't even say I remember signing the paperwork.
Oh, okay.
But I woke up and now I'm in the Army. So I had to send word to my sisters because they weren't going to let me go. We got you. Now you're going to go to camp.
Okay.
And so I joined the 7th Kansas Volunteer Cavalry as a wagon driver because that was my experience
Oh, sure.
early on with Russell Majors and Waddell. I had a number of jobs before I became a Pony Express rider. So I drove a wagon, then I became a courier, and then I became a scout, which was actually another way of calling it a spy. But I would take the money that I got paid, which was $30 a month, and I would send 20 home to my sisters.
Oh,
And I lived on 10, and the Army
nice.
pay, Army clothing, it was all there so for the taking, and I took advantage of it. And from this experience in taking care of family and my exposure to the East and people back there and Mr. Judson, I knew I had to do something to support my family. And now I'm married. I got married at 20 to Louisa Cody, or Frederici was her maiden name. And I had to find a way to support them, and I knew going back to being a stagecoach driver, I'm not going to make much money, justice a piece. I'm going to get $1 to marry somebody. I'm going to have to marry a lot of people. So what am I going to do? But when Mr. Judson came up with this play, Scouts of the Prairie, that's it. I'm ready. And we became famous. And that's where the money started to come from. And for 10 years, I performed on stage. And what's kind of amazing, because as I say, I'm not an actor. I never was an actor, wasn't concerned about being an actor. And the newspaper people that would come and see the show, the performance, they would write, it was thoroughly entertaining, but any adherence to the script was purely accidental. So there was a lot of ad-libbing. There was a lot of imbibing on stage. Sometimes Wild Bill, he would, James as I call him, or Jimmy Boy, he would have words with certain detractors in the audience. And there was one interesting little thing, and it led to me having to fire him from what they were called combinations. It was Scouts of the Prairie or Buffalo Bill Fights Off the Indian. You know, there was always a double name. They were called combinations, and you could flip-flop them the way you needed. And, well, anyhow, somebody was heckling. Actually, there were 3 people in the audience heckling James. And he wasn't used to that because he thought we were making fun of ourselves on stage. This isn't, we really did these things. Why are we hamming it up? Why, this is over the top. He couldn't wrap his head around it. No way. Well, these people were heckling him, and he walked to the edge of the stage and looked him in the eye and says, "You meet me in the hotel saloon after the show, and we'll see what I can do." So went back to the play, finished the play. We hurried off stage, went over to the saloon. Me and Texas Jack Alejandro grabbed what we figured to be ringside seats. Bill leaned up against the bar watching the front doors, and somewhere along the way, I don't know if the original 3 showed up, but they brought reinforcements. There were 6 or 7 of them that came in, and not being gentlemen like they would be in the West, they all jumped him. And he cleaned everybody's clock. It was an amazing fight. I'm glad I got to witness it, but it cost me $1,500 in damages. And at that point, this wasn't the only occurrence that James got me into. So I knew he wasn't happy, so I had to pay him off. And Texas Jack and I bought him a couple of pistols and sent him on his merry way. And that was tough because he was a friend, and how do you let a friend go? So.
Sure.
But it was humorous, but it was also painful to the pocketbook. Because when you the shows, when you admitted people in, if they got a seat, it was a quarter.
Oh, goodness sakes. Oh,
And a lot
do
of
the
the
math.
Indian extras that we used that played Indians, we had to pay them a dime per
Okay.
performance.
Uh-huh.
And there's another little thing I'll tell you about James and the Indians. And standing room was 10 cents.
No, they
So,
do,
and
yeah.
you stayed, you performed in one theater for as long as you can bring a crowd in. Once it started tapering off, it was time to move on. There was no booking ahead and months, you know, there wasn't the ability. So
Right, right.
you knew, or somebody contacted you and said, we have an opening at our theater or our opera house,
Uh-huh.
and away we would go. You know, sometimes we'd be there for a month and a half, 2 shows a day.
Oh,
So
wow.
another amusing, if you will, anecdote about James is that he would be bored if he didn't have a line to do, or he would pull out his pistol, and we had allegedly a stage full of dead Indians, and he would shoot them with the blanks in the legs, and these allegedly dead Indians would hop up, screaming, running off stage, sometimes with their clothes on fire because the proximity of him shooting at them, they'd light up there. So anyhow, you know, I had my problems with James. And after about 10 years of performing on stage, which was fun, and at times my wife and family could come, and my little boy would yell out, "Hello, Papa," right in the middle of the play, and I'd have to stop and say, "You be a good boy, you go home with your mama and go to bed," you know. And but after about 10 years of that and the travel and certain things, I wanted to do something bigger.
Sure.
I was ready to move on, and I had been toying with the idea because I had temporarily located my family in New York.
Oh,
And so a lot of museums or traveling shows, if you will, would bring artifacts from the West. So I decided to try that, and I brought in about a dozen buffalo, and we went out to a park, and we were going to have riders and bring a couple Indian artifacts out, and, you know, just kind of sow the seeds and see what might work with a public performance. I paused because I have in my mind these dozen buffalo that all have a mind of their own. They're ornery, they're intractable, they're born angry. And they don't really herd too much unless they were brought up in buffalo or family oriented. So
Okay.
you have all these buffalo that weren't from the same family.
Oh,
Who's the boss?
oh, sure.
So you have me and 2 or 3 other fellows on horseback and 3 or 4 policemen on foot trying to herd these buffalo back because there was no fences, there were no gates, there was no way to corral these animals.
Yeah.
So lesson learned. And in 1883, in my ranch in North Platte, Nebraska, the town had fell down on having a 4th of July celebration. Somehow or other, it wasn't planned properly, they didn't plan it, things fell apart. I decided to have the 4th of July, Buffalo Bill's 4th of July big blowout. And from that point, it started to grow. Next year, trotting grounds, there was always like a racetrack, what became racetracks. And people would take their little carriages and they'd just drive around a circle.
Oh.
It was called riding parks, driving parks.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of them became racetracks, or they served dual purpose. But the next one was out there, and then it just grew exponentially to where eventually I had 600 to 800 employees. You know, I didn't want to hire just locals, and then when I went to Europe, I wanted real Indians. I wanted to show the public what I had experienced and was starting to disappear in the West. And I had to pay the Bureau of Indian Affairs $300 a piece for every Indian I used, whether man, woman, or child, little papoose, $300. I had to promise their paychecks would be sent to the reservation, to their families, less their allowance, and then at a certain date I had to bring them back to the reservation with a new suit of clothes. And back in the 1880s, if you can imagine, $300, that is almost like saying I paid $5,000 a piece to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which did not go to that specific tribe or whatever. Whether it actually went to the coffers of the government taking care of the Indians, I don't know. All I know is what I had to do to have 80 Indians perform.
Right, okay.
And we went to Europe. Sitting Bull was the second highest paid performer after myself. He gave Annie Oakley her nickname, Little Miss Sure Shot. He wanted to marry her, but it basically came down to, I told him he didn't have enough horses. He couldn't trade for them.
Okay.
So anyhow, it was very, very popular. I don't wish, because it's unseemly for me to brag, but I was known everywhere. Everywhere. There wasn't anywhere I couldn't go. And in North Platte, Nebraska, one time, a little anecdote, I went to my favorite saloon there, and the streets aren't paved or anything, my long hair and whatever. I used to pin it up underneath my hat to go out and about so I didn't have to wash my hair all the time. Well, I get to the saloon, and I pull my hat off, and I'm taking the pins out. The little boys are trying to scurry in around the bar in case I dropped one, and they could say they had one of Buffalo Bill's pins. But I'm cursing my hair. God, I hate doing this. The bartender says, "Bill, why don't you cut your hair?"
Oh.
Simple solution. Why don't you cut your hair? And I looked at him, I said, if I did that, I would starve. Because everybody knew this look.
Right.
And it wasn't, when it started, when I was buffalo hunting, it had nothing to do with style or an affectation, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
There was a reason. Out on the prairie while you're hunting, keeps the sun off the back of your neck.
Very true.
The cold wind, when it's blowing stuff, pull your jacket up on it, keeps the cold wind, snow off your neck and whatever. And when you became a scout, or even when you were buffalo hunting out on the prairie and having to deal with Indians,
Mm-hmm.
it was sort of like a taunt. You want this? Come get it. And the Indians called me Pahashka, the long-haired one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
how interesting.
So that was me and my point in history, if you will, as living history. That's what everything I did led up to me being the showman.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing, and some people confuse my life with things that I did and they say you didn't do. And there are a lot of things that were written about me that I didn't do. One man alone, if you will, one man wrote over 200 dime novels about me. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you I did not do everything that was mentioned in all those books. But I did win the Medal of Honor for a campaign along the Platte. I don't know. That's one of the things that I'm most proud of.
Sure.
Is that I won the Medal of Honor.
Oh,
and,
nice, nice.
More than meeting kings or queens or so and so from this estate and this is. I'm glad to get back to the United States because there was only about 39 of them.
Oh.
Whereas you go to Europe, there's hundreds of estates.
Yeah, right. So. How fun is that? Well, Buffalo Bill, you sure have had a journey in life.
It has been quite a journey. I've met quite a number of famous people,
Mm-hmm.
some people that I admire and I thought should have gotten more acclaim than I did. And had while Bill lived, I'm sure he would have had gone down with the history that he wanted. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to be known as a man killer. I met Kit Carson. I named my first son after Kit Carson.
Oh,
Kit
okay.
Carson Cody,
Oh,
was
sure.
my son's name.
Yeah.
So I called him Al, but Jack Slade, the desperado, everybody thought he was. He treated me very fairly. And when I drove stagecoach, he always remembered my name and inquired of how things were going for me and about my family back in Kansas. So,
nice.
And yet he got strung up over the corral,
Oh, gosh.
He was quite the character, but I was naive enough at my age that he was just another nice man that
Mm-hmm.
took good care and looked out for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I met Sheridan and a lot of the Civil War people. I met Custer.
Did
Colonel
you?
Custer. Scouted for him with the Duke from Russia, the Archduke, and the Great Hunt. And that's where I think there was a little tension between myself and Custer, because I was up and coming and younger. And he liked the attention. He was flamboyant. He was a good officer. I have a lot of respect for him, but he didn't mention me in the reports as much as the newspapers did.
Well, sure.
And one of the greatest acquisitions for the Buffalo Bills Wild West, and trying to show the people back east and anywhere and in Europe, everywhere we traveled, what the western frontier was like. And an acquisition that I acquired was the Deadwood stagecoach. It was used on the route and had been abandoned because of breakdown, whatever. And it was replaced, but just outside of town, it was still sitting there. And in one of the many travels, we went back to that area, found it and refurbished it and incorporated it in all of our shows. And we gave all of the royalty back in England, France, Germany, etc., rides in the stagecoach. There were occasions that we did not let them know, but they were going to be part of the show, and we would have the Indian attack. And so the driver up on that stage is whipping it around circles.
Right.
Stagecoaches are very bouncy critters. At normal speeds, it helps absorb the shock and stuff of travel. But when you're starting to go high speed, it's quite the ride. And, some of this royalty were not accustomed to being or traveling in such a fashion. And initially, until the cameraman showed up, they were disgruntled or unhappy or harumping. And but everybody was all buddy when the bourbon and the photographer showed up.
Well, sure.
So that was very interesting and very important to show that piece of history for people. What else? There was a few occurrences that weren't so happy. One time there was a big train wreck. Usually took 2 or 3 trains to take all of my entourage and their things. And there was a train wreck, and there was over $10,000 worth of damage.
Wow. Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, so we recovered from that, and life was good.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Buffalo Bill, for
so
coming
welcome.
on. Psychic
Miss Sandie.
Miss Sandie, that's
I don't know what happened to Miss Nancy, but I'm glad I got to speak with you.
Thank you so much for being on our show. What I would like to say is we are going to be having a part 2, so Buffalo Bill can tell us about his modern days. All right. So thank you for watching Psychic Creation History Series. And please remember that history created who we are today.